Hi everyone, this is our presentation of the second chapter of the Illustrated History of Britain, the Saxon Invasion. In the first part of the chapter, we are going to deal with invaders. Three powerful Germanic tribes, the Saxons, the Angles, and the Jutes, who were warlike and illiterate, began to settle in Britain after AD 430. The Jutes settled in the south coast and were soon considered no different from the other two tribes. The Angles settled in the east and north, whilst the Saxons settled in a band of land from the Thames estuary westwards. The larger part of Britain received its new name from the Anglo-Saxon migration, England, the land of the Angles. Most of the British Celts were pushed into the mountains in the far west, which the Saxons called Wales, the land of the foreigners. Some were driven into Cornwall, where they later accepted the rule of the Saxon lords, and some other, in the north, were driven into the Lowlands, which later became Scotland. Many Celts became slaves of the Saxons, and little from their culture is preserved nowadays. By the middle of the 7th century, the three largest kingdoms, Mercia, Northumbria, and Wessex, were the most powerful. A century later, King Offa of Mercia claimed kingship of the English, since he was powerful enough to employ thousands of men to build a huge dike at the Welsh border to keep out the Celts. The power of Mercia did not survive King Offa's death, since a new king had to rebuild the people's loyalty. The Saxon kings began to change loyalty to the family for loyalty to the lord and king.
Now we're going to talk about government and society. The Saxons created institutions such as the King's Council, called Witan, which was born from informal meetings in which the king asked for advice or support on difficult matters. By the 10th century, the Witan became a formal body, issuing laws and charters. Nowadays, the king or queen has a privy council, a group of advisors. By the end of the 10th century, the Saxons divided the land into shires, or counties, which had a shire reeve, a king's local administrator, or sheriff. Anglo-Saxon technology changed the English agriculture by introducing a heavy plough which allowed them to plough in a long straight line across the fields, leading to changes in land ownership and organization. Village lands were divided into large fields of thin strips, which were then assigned to each family. This Anglo-Saxon pattern was the basis of the English agriculture for 1,000 years until the 18th century. Each district had a manor, a large house where local villagers went to pay taxes, where justice was administered, and where men met to join the Anglo-Saxon army. The third, the lord of the manor, organized and made sure that the lands were properly shared. By the beginning of the 11th century, they became warlords. This was the beginning of the class system made of king, lord, soldiers, and workers, and later on the men of learning, which came from the Christian church. Moving on, we're going to talk about Christianity, the partnership of church and state. In 597, Pope Gregory the Great sent a monk to reestablish Christianity in England. He went to Canterbury because the king's wife came from Europe and was already a Christian. The monk, Augustine, became the first Archbishop of Canterbury in 601. Several ruling families accepted Christianity, but little progress was made with ordinary people, partly because Augustine wanted to establish Christian authority, so the rulers were the priority. On the other hand, it was the Celtic Church the one that brought Christianity to the ordinary people, with their bishops from Scotland, Wales, and Ireland going to the villages teaching Christianity. The bishops from the Roman Church lived at the courts of the kings, making them centers of church power across England. The two Christian churches were opposites. One cared about the ordinary people, and the other about authority and organization. England became Christian quite quickly. Saxon kings helped the church to grow, but also the church gave more power to the royalty. With the support of the bishops, kings had God's approval. When King Offa arranged his son to be crowned as his successor, he made sure to do it in a Christian ceremony led by a bishop. This suggested that kings were not only chosen by people, but also by God. The Church also increased the power of the English state by establishing monasteries or minsters where men were educated for the growth of royal and church authority. King Albert, who ruled Wessex in the late 800s, used the literate men of the Church to help establish a system of law, educate people, and write down important matters such as chronicles of the period and laws. The class division increased because all the progress gave power to those who could write and read. The anglo-saxons preferred the Roman Church because of economic reasons, since towns and villages grew around the monasteries, increasing trade. Now it's time for the Vikings. Towards the end of the 8th century, Vikings coming from Norway and Denmark arrived to the island, tempted by its wealth. They only raided at first, but in 865 they came to conquer and settle, and quickly accepted Christianity. By 875 only King Alfred held against the Vikings, who had already taken most of England, but it wasn't until 878 when he finally won, and 8 years later he captured London, making a treaty with the Vikings. The Viking rule was called the Danelaw, or the law of the Danes' rule. Alfred built burghs, which were walled settlements to keep the Vikings out. These burghs, later called "bros", became prosperous market towns.
The last part of the chapter is who should be king. By 950, Ethelred, the Saxon king, decided to pay the Vikings to stay away. The money came from a tax called dangle, which affected most heavily the ordinary villagers. This was the beginning of a regular tax set for the armies. When Ethelred died, the Witan, fearing disorder, decided that Canute, the Viking king, take his place because the Danish king was better than no king. Canute died in 1035 and his son in 1040, so the Witan chose Edward, one of Ethelred's sons. Edward the Confessor was more interested in the church than in kingship, so by the time of his death almost every village had its own church. He started a new church fit for a king at Westminster, just outside the city of London. Edward only lived until 1066, when he died without an obvious heir. The Witan chose Harold, who was part of a powerful family of Wessex, the Godwinsons. He had no royal blood, but he seemed to be a good choice for the English throne. Duke William of Normandy claimed the throne, stating that King Edward had promised it to him, and that Harold had told him that he won't try to take the throne for himself. Harold did not deny William's claim, but argued that it was made unwillingly, so he was not tied by it. In 1066 Harold had to march north into Shropshire to defeat the Danes, who had not given up their claim to the English throne. When Harold defeated them, William had landed in England with an army. Thinking that he could defeat William as he had defeated the Danes, Harold fought them without waiting for the third. But the Norman army was better armed, and Harold was defeated and killed in battle near Hastings. William marched to London, which quickly gave in, and was crowned King of England in Edward's new church of Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day, 1066.
Okay everyone, so that's it for our presentation on chapter 2 of an illustrated history of Britain, and we hope you liked it. Thanks for watching.